Welcome to the Thriving Leaders podcast, where we dive into real conversations that help leaders grow, teams flourish, and organisations thrive. I'm your host, Claire Gray, Leadership and Team Facilitator at Thriving Culture. I'm also the author of Thriving Leaders, Learn the Skills to Lead Confidently. This podcast is filled with practical tools, tips, actions, and insights that you can immediately apply so you can lead confidently now. In Season 2 of the Thriving Leaders podcast, I'm interviewing thought leaders from around the world to pick their brains on what it takes to build a thriving team. This is helping me write my second book, Thriving Teams, which will be out later in the year in 2025. I hope you enjoy the podcast. I first met Megumi Miki back in 2009 when we were both working at the National Australia Bank. And even then, I knew of the quiet power Megumi brings to every room she's in. I hadn't seen Megumi for about 10 years until yesterday. We were at a conference together for Facet 5, and it reminded me of some of the key qualities that Megumi demonstrates. She listens deeply, she speaks deliberately, and when she does speak, you pay attention because she might not be the loudest voice in the room, but she's one of the wisest voices. Megumi Miki is a Japanese-Australian speaker, author, and consultant in leadership, culture, and diversity and inclusion. Megumi is best known for her book, Quietly Powerful: How Your Quiet Nature is Your Hidden Leadership Strength. She challenges conventional assumptions about what it takes to be a successful leader. The book has received the Australian Career Book Award for 2020 from RSA Oceania and Best Leadership Book of 2020 from the Australian Business Book Awards. Through her work, Megumi is redefining what leadership looks like in today's world. You don't need to be loud to be influential, and in fact, some of our best leaders lead with quiet strength. So welcome, Megumi.
Thank you. Such kind words. I'm blushing a little bit when you first started.
Well, it was great to see you yesterday, and it's great to have you on the Thriving Leaders podcast.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
Beautiful. Let's start with a bit about you for the people listening who are new to your work. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do and why it matters so much right now?
Sure. I actually do a range of things, and I've been doing leadership development, culture change type of work for over 20 years now. It just shows my age. I think it's getting more than 20 years, many more years than 20 years. But I started this work that I'm more known for called Quietly Powerful, which in 2016, so that's been a while as well. But the reason why I started it were twofold. One was because of my professional background of working in leadership development. I often used to think, oh, how come these really amazing leaders that I've worked with keep getting overlooked? And I had many colleagues who I thought, oh, she'd be an amazing leader to work for. And then she gets overlooked. Or one particular instance where she went through like a leadership assessment center and she came out being told that she had no leadership potential, where I saw her in action and I thought, hang on, there's a lot of leadership potential there. So I got really frustrated with that as a professional. And then on the other hand, as an individual, I am more of a quieter person. And I had my own experiences of feeling overlooked or not listened to and things like that. And I thought, there's something not quite right here. And I thought, if there's something I can do that can help individuals as well as organizations to not miss out on this talent, then I'd really like to do that. So that was the beginning of my little frustration that I thought, okay, there needs to be something done. But I wasn't totally convinced, and so I went out and spoke to quite a number of quietly powerful leaders who were already very successful, but had that quieter demeanor and quieter style. And I got convinced that they do exist and that they are highly effective. And so I figured that's worth sharing. So that's how I really got started, Claire.
Awesome. I love the catalyst, and I'm sure a lot of people will really appreciate the work that you've done who also felt that frustration too.
Yeah.
I love the words quietly powerful. It's such a beautiful phrase. What does that actually mean?
It's so funny you say it's a beautiful phrase because when I first started, there were people who told me, that's like an oxymoron, isn't it? It's like, how can quiet be powerful? Because that's the natural response to quiet. People never think of it as being quite powerful. And I often ask this question in presentations where I say, if you were walking around and talking about somebody and they say, oh, she's really nice and she's actually quite a good, really good worker, but she's a bit quiet though. what comes to mind? And of course, the immediate responses are not confident, doesn't have much to say, not much substance, etc., etc. And then eventually some people go, oh, but she listens well and she's really thoughtful. And so there's both sides to it, but nobody really comes up with powerful. Therefore, I just thought, okay, if they don't belong, then they should belong. And so that's why I put them together. And if I were to explain what I think it means, it's really imagining those people that you've come across in your life, in your work, the people who may be quietly spoken, but when they do speak, they make a lot of sense or they have a very wise insight. Or it could be somebody who seems to not make things about themselves. They
Mm.
allow the space for everybody else to shine. And I've seen a lot of that in the quietly powerful leaders. They're understated, they don't go off and talk about themselves all the time, but they talk about the team, the organization, the cause. So they're very focused on the purpose, the work. So they don't make it about themselves. And I've worked with many of those leaders from time to time, and I love working with them. And it's interesting when I started sharing this idea, quite a few people commented on whatever post or whatever I've shared or come and spoke to me afterwards saying the best leader that I've worked for was a quiet one.
I completely agree. Some of my best leaders were probably quieter too. Some of the things you've spoken about, being humble, when they speak with impact. It's less about them and more about everyone around them, like you've said too, which I think's really important. So what do you think is the driver of someone being quieter?
Yeah, there's a range. Yeah. I think there's a misunderstanding about why somebody might be quiet because there's people most of the time they think they're introverts. That's the very first thing that people think of. And unfortunately, that's a very limited view because, yes, of course, introverts can be quieter, but there are also loud introverts too. I don't know whether you've come across any. I have a colleague and a voice coach. He's Richard. He's the most gregarious, loud person, but he's a real introvert. And he says that he used to be shy as well, but he's overcome the shyness. But as an introvert, he also likes to have time on his own and make sure that he recovers. And then he goes out and he leads a choir and he does performances and sings and all sorts of things. So
Yeah.
there's such a range even within introversion that you can't box people into introverts. But there's also, as we talked about yesterday, we had our session with Facet 5, the personality profiling tool. There are other elements that can contribute to people being quieter. So high emotionality. So somebody who gets really stressed easily, anxious really easily, they can go quiet because they're worried about what other people might think, or they might say the wrong thing. And so there's, even if you're an extrovert, you might go quiet. There's also people who are really sensitive, highly sensitive people get overwhelmed really easily. And so they might go quiet as a result of that. I have a friend who's an extrovert, highly sensitive person, and she goes from really loud to suddenly going really quiet. And so that can happen. And then there's also like cultural conditioning as well. So my upbringing was very much to be seen, not heard as a child. And, that can play a part as well. So there's lots of reasons. And then, of course, you would probably know from all your work with teams, there's power dynamics in any group. And so, with a power dynamic happening in a group, then the people who feel less powerful would go quieter because they don't feel like they have a voice or have a say. So, yeah, there's so many reasons. And leaders not being aware of that, they can misdiagnose and misunderstand why people might be doing what they're doing.
Mm. And I think the reality is there's probably a multitude of the factors that you spoke about, like on top of each other, that
Yeah,
kind of compile to make more quiet or less quiet or vice versa as
that's
well.
right. That's right.
Um,
And
yeah.
actually, there's another layer, which is somebody using it strategically. You
Yeah.
think of negotiators who are really good. I hear some of the best negotiators just zip it up and they don't say
Mm.
anything until the other side cracks. So it could be a strategy.
Yeah. And also, like, I know a lot of leaders who maybe they're extroverted or maybe there's other things where they're used to speaking up, have to be quite conscious to
Mm,
let other people speak first so that they're not the first person to speak, because
yeah.
otherwise everyone will sort of follow based on their power or authority,
Yes.
what they've said. So they have to be really conscious to be quiet,
Yes.
even though that's not their natural preference either.
Yes, definitely. And I've seen leaders do that effectively, whether they're naturally quiet or not. It's just that the quietly powerful leaders that I've seen, they do that naturally and they use it as their leadership strength.
Yeah. So you might have already touched on this in terms of the person who went to the assessment centre, but what was the turning point where you realised that this was a strength that needed to go more mainstream and be more something
Mm,
that leaders are more intentional about in traditional leadership development spaces?
mm. I think it's my personal experience of working with leaders who were quieter, and I found it really rewarding to work with. So, one person I actually did end up interviewing for the book, I worked with him. He was like the senior leader in a consulting project. And the thing that's really interesting is he just left the team alone. He trusted the team to get the work done. He was there if people needed to chat with him, but he just it's like the extreme of empowerment, if you like, that he just left people alone. And the other thing that I noticed with him was he would just give credit to he shared credit. So he would have celebrations and he'd really uplift the team and really speak about what each individual has contributed, and it just made the team feel fantastic being part of the team. So I still remember that particular project really well, and this is like 25, 30 years ago. And yeah, and so he was one of my top choices for interviewing the leaders that I wanted to interview for the book. And yeah, so my personal experience, first of all. And then I think by interviewing quite a lot of these leaders, it did give me conviction that this needs to go mainstream. Of course, reading books like Susan Cain's book, there was another book called Introvert Power by Laurie Helgo. I know I said it's not just about introversion, but some of the ideas still came from some of those books. And I just thought, in the context of leadership, back in 2000 or sorry 2020 that I published the book, there wasn't a lot specifically on leadership that was to do with being quieter. So I thought that's worthwhile putting into the mainstream.
Yeah. And in your research, did you also interview loud leaders over time? Have you done any sort of comparison between alpha or dominated leaders, or I don't want to say loud leaders,
Yeah.
because have you done any analysis or is there a lot of research on the contrast between the two out of interest?
No, I haven't, but it's a good idea, interesting idea to pursue. And what would you be interested in terms of contrast? Because obviously, how they come across will be very contrasting, and you can pick that up.
Yeah, and maybe it's the stereotypical alpha leader that's more command and control and the
Uh-huh.
center of attention. Maybe we've got a lot of literature on that already. Maybe we
Yeah,
don't need to do more research on it
yeah,
necessarily,
yeah.
but it's probably just about what are the underlying qualities that make them a great leader. Because I also
Mm,
think that loud leaders can demonstrate, be inspiring, and
absolutely.
can empower and develop others. They just do it in a different way.
Definitely. I totally agree. We just need a bit more diversity of the leadership styles, because traditionally the charismatic, inspiring, motivating people leading from the front type leaders have been put on the pedestal. And so I think if we can balance it out, I think organizations would benefit much more as well, because you need leaders with energy that push things through. And then there's also, you need leaders who can really support or bring people along the journey, or really listen and make sure that there's ear to the ground. For example, risk management is a big one. Like, if you don't have the ears to the ground, then you could get into lots of trouble, as we see on the news all the time.
Yeah. Definitely. And I think it makes me think about our recruitment processes and how we recruit and select people into these leadership roles is so
Yeah,
critical. And,
yeah. I actually recently did a talk earlier this year to the Melbourne Talent Meetup. And so they're talent professionals, and I was really excited about that for that specific reason, that I would really love for the talent professionals to be across this, so that they don't dismiss somebody straight away just because they don't appear confident in the first instance.
yeah,
Because first impressions do count, but if that's all you go with, then you might be missing out on a whole lot of substance behind it.
yeah, definitely.
Mm.
So you've built quite a movement around quiet leadership. And I imagine it wasn't necessarily easy as well. But can you share some moments for yourself in terms of where you might have been misunderstood or undervalued and how you navigated that personally?
So if I think back to my earlier career, there were many moments I felt that I might have been misunderstood or missed out on opportunities. The thing about this, though, is it's the same with any of the isms. You can't prove it.
Yeah,
Nobody's going to say, "Well, we didn't hire you because you're Japanese," or "We didn't hire you because you're quiet." Nobody's going to tell you that. But I just wondered from time to time, I wonder whether I missed out because of certain reasons. And sometimes getting feedback like you need more executive presence just gives you a little hint of, oh, maybe that's what it is. Yeah, so there's definitely that. But I feel like in terms of the challenges of starting Quietly Powerful, it was more inside me. So it was my own voice, my own overthinking that I kept on thinking, okay, is this worthwhile? Is this going to be useful for anybody? Susan Cain's already had a book out. Why would I bother? Who am I to even talk about this idea? So, yeah, starting Quietly Powerful itself was probably the most difficult. Yes, there was misunderstandings from the outside, but I think it was more about me getting out of my own way.
Yeah. It's so interesting when I wrote Thriving Leaders, because the purpose of that book was about helping leaders have the skills to be confident. And confidence is one of those things, like often you have to feel confident before you actually are confident. um, and even when I was writing, I started writing about imposter syndrome and the exact same thing went through my head, like, who am I to write a book? All the like
Yeah,
self-doubt. And I was
yeah,
like, oh, this is so ironic because this is literally what I'm writing about right
yeah.
now. So yeah, I
Yeah, they do say that you end up doing the work that you need to learn more about.
yeah,
So,
exactly. The irony of our expertise, yeah. So there's quite a narrow definition of leadership, although I feel like there's probably a million different definitions of leadership at the
mm.
same time. But what would you say leaders listening who feel that they have to change who they are to succeed, what advice would you give them?
So some of the feedback I get in the programs that I run, people saying they're relieved. They say, "Oh, thank goodness, finally a program where I wasn't told to change myself."
Mm,
Or people say, "Oh, okay, I finally realized I'm not broken. I'm not, there's nothing wrong with me," which makes me sad actually. Because I think when we start to try and put people into a mold and people get feedback like you need to speak up more, you need to be more confident, you need to do this, you need to do that, then people feel like, well, I'm not doing it, therefore I'm broken or I need fixing. I think the challenge here is, well, rather than seeing yourself as needing fixing, can you get to a place of appreciating yourself fully? And this is part of my program. The first step of appreciating yourself fully so that you can build on what you have rather than trying to fix what you have. And that's a big difference. And appreciating fully, I really try to work on appreciating the whole self, not just your strengths, because there is a bit of a movement around play to your strengths, strengths-based coaching, and things like that, which is useful, but I feel like it's incomplete because then you start to go, oh, what about my weaknesses? They're no good, they're going to get in the way. So I do work with people on how to perceive your weaknesses differently. You can actually reframe them depending on the situation, and that's a really important piece to appreciate yourself fully. And so that's certainly advice to really think about what's the story you're telling yourself about yourself. If you're putting yourself down to the extent that you hold yourself back, then you're the one that's getting in the way, which is what I discovered, of course. So I had to get over myself. And that's the internal dialogue that can really get in the way.
and I think the reality is we all hold limiting beliefs around ourselves, and it's just
Absolutely.
when that voice gets very loud that it's hard to push through. I
Yeah.
actually just signed up for a Harvard Business Review session, and I can't pronounce his name properly, but it's Thomas Tomorrow
Oh,
from
Chamara
the
Brunswick. Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's the
yeah.
one. But he's all because I talk a lot about authentic leadership and we
Yeah.
need to be authentic, but the talk that I'm going to is like, don't be yourself.
Yeah.
And it's almost the opposite of that.
Yeah.
But I think it's that, like, to your point, like sometimes we can overplay strengths
Yeah.
and just focus on strengths. We don't focus on our weaknesses, and we are whole people and like we're imperfect. That's part of what being human
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
But I'll be really interested to see what Thomas shares there because I'm probably going to question some of my beliefs around authenticity as well, which I'm
Yeah,
looking forward
no,
to.
I follow his work quite closely because his first, actually, it's not his first book, it's probably like second or third, was Why Do So Many Incompetent Men Become Leaders and How to Fix It, that one.
Yes, yes,
Yeah,
I do.
so,
Yeah.
so a lot of that also informed my work because even though he was talking about men, in some ways he wasn't because he was talking about the fact that we assume the louder, the more confident appearing, the so-called charismatic leaders, we look at that and self-absorbed and things and go, oh, that's leadership material. And he's cautioning against that. That's what he was really doing. And so that can apply to men and women. And
Yeah.
so he actually says that in the book as well. So that's that. But the don't be, what's the book title? Don't be authentic. Don't be yourself.
Don't be yourself.
Don't be yourself. Yeah. I was curious about that book too.
Mm.
And I found an article which was like a short version of the book. And so I read it and I completely understand where it comes from, where it actually aligns with what I'm trying to do with my work, where it's appreciate yourself fully and not lose yourself. But having said that, my other side of the program that I do is adapt purposefully. So when you're required to, you've got to adapt. You can't just stay yourself and expect to
Mm.
be effective, especially in leadership roles, but in other cases as well. And we're never constant anyway, like human beings are very adaptable. And when you have to, you do things out of character. I talk about in the program the free trait theory. Have you heard of the free trait theory?
No, tell me about that.
Dr. Brian Little has a TED talk on which is quite funny. He just talks about how we can completely behave out of character when
Mm.
there's some energy behind it, and that energy can come from passion or desperation or absolute
Mm.
necessity. So he gives an example of it. Say you're one of your children or one of your loved ones are in hospital and they're not getting the attention that they need, and you're a very agreeable kind of person, you become very disagreeable at that moment, right?
Yeah.
It's like, why am I not getting the attention and the care that I need? And there are many examples where you can totally play out of character. And I talk about, I don't particularly enjoy, oh, actually, I do enjoy it. I don't go out to do public speaking as something that I love to do. I do enjoy it now because I'm much more comfortable with it, but I absolutely found it difficult when I first started. But the reason why I kept pushing and added skills and tried to do more of it was because there was a purpose behind it. Like I felt, and every time I stand on stage, I say to myself, if it helps one person, it's worthwhile your discomfort.
Yeah, I love that purpose-driven approach.
Mm,
It's interesting because 'cause I'm similar, like, I actually do feel energized when I'm in front of a room and more in a facilitation role than necessarily a speaking role,
mm,
but even my son's like, "Oh," he's like, "Oh, I don't wanna get up on stage, I'll
mm.
get stage fright," and I was like, "I think that's just human nature to feel that way, but it's
Yeah,
about learning the skill to feel confident to be
yeah,
able to do it in a way that's also
yeah.
kind of authentic to you too."
Yeah. You can imagine though with quieter people, that's very, very common because it's all eyes on you because we don't tend to like attention. There's also an assumption that quieter people may not speak very well, which is also wrong because there are some quieter people who are amazing speakers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like you, for example.
I don't know about that. I'm still learning.
I've seen you on stage before, you're a very good speaker. So you mentioned before gender, and I guess we have this view of what leadership looks like. And then often, and I remember if I go back through my career, different female leaders were successful, probably
Mm,
had to dial up more of
mm,
assertiveness or a lot of more alpha leadership type of behaviors to be successful.
yeah.
In your research, did you notice any kind of gender differences in terms of quiet leaders being male versus female, or did you also notice anything in terms of gender, in terms of the expectations of leaders and whether there's a link to gender?
I didn't specifically look at gender, so it's probably my hypothesis more than an outcome that's come out of the interviews. But I interviewed all sorts of different, like both genders and also different cultural backgrounds. And it was a little bit Australian centric when I wrote the book, but I've now interviewed some leaders in the US and Europe. Have I gone to Europe yet? No, not yet. And Asia and things. So it's expanding as we speak. But in terms of gender, I think the one thing that I did notice was that being a quieter male leader seemed to be a little more acceptable.
Oh, interesting. And
Mm.
what's your hypothesis around that?
The male leaders that I spoke with, and it's not across the board, so it's probably not some of the male leaders did say that they didn't feel like they were listened to and they felt overlooked, etc. But there were a few more male leaders who they said they were quieter, but they were not ignored or not taken seriously. So I think they managed to get their voices heard more so. That would be one of the things that Whereas I felt like the female leaders, they had to work harder. And I think that's what you're talking about too, that they had to dial up the assertiveness and so on. So it's like a double layer of, or double, I call it the double glass ceiling, double glazed glass ceiling.
Yeah,
It's like another level.
a level to break through, which makes it challenging. So I'm very keen to talk about teams because obviously Thriving Teams is coming out very soon. And I do think that quieter people in teams gets noticed as well. What can teams do to make sure that all the voices are heard within a team?
So I think the very first thing is to become aware of what's happening in a team,
Mm.
because especially when you're having a really passionate, engaging conversation, the people who are speaking may not even notice that there are a few quieter people in the room because they're so absorbed in the ideas and the discussion. And nothing wrong with being absorbed in the ideas and discussion, but what are you missing? So, being a quieter person myself, I notice the people who haven't spoken all the time. And if you are one of those people who notice it, then be that person, be the facilitator that brings some of those different people in. I think that will be a really good contribution to the group, because sometimes some of the people who are sitting back and listening and observing and thinking may have the key to the breakthrough that you're looking for, rather than the ones that are really in the conversation.
Mm.
It's like the balcony and the dance floor idea. They might be sitting back going, oh, what about this? And they can see it from another angle. I think that'll be really missed out. The teams miss out if you don't do that. The other thing to do as a team is not make assumptions about each other. So just because somebody's quiet doesn't mean that they have nothing to say. Just because they're quiet doesn't always mean that they agree. They might be thinking something completely different in the background, and they just haven't had a chance sometimes. I know lots of quieter people often say, well, I had something to say, but there was no space.
Yeah.
So that can happen, even though they had something to say.
Mm.
And then assuming that they're just lacking confidence or whatever is also not necessarily true, because maybe they're confident, they just had enough of not being listened to.
Yeah.
So there's lots of reasons, like we talked about earlier, lots of reasons why somebody might be quiet.
Biggest learnings as a facilitator was not making the assumption that because someone's quiet, they're not doing the work. Like they're processing things, reflecting. And I think the role of a facilitator is to bring people in and notice when people's
Yeah.
voices haven't been heard. But then at the same time, I've also observed, and it's interesting, it's with a particular client that has lots of different cultures within it.
Hmm.
And I also observe, even when I'm in their meetings, that it's sometimes hard to get a word in because,
Mm.
and
Yeah.
so those louder voices keep getting heard and heard and heard, and there isn't enough space for the quieter voices to get into. So as a leader, I think being in that role of authority, you do need to be that facilitator to help bring all the voices into the room
Yeah.
as well, especially when decisions are made. I do think that silence doesn't equal agreement.
Yeah.
We need to make sure that everyone's had an opportunity to speak up before we make decisions too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. I've been doing work with global teams, and I know we spoke a little bit
Mm.
about this yesterday, but I do think more and more teams don't have cultural boundaries anymore because there's global teams and they're borderless. And there's lots of different dynamics of why people are quiet, as you mentioned before. Some could be around diversity, personality, cultural differences, neurodiversity as well. But how do teams navigate some of this diversity within them?
Well, I thought yesterday's conversation was really great to sort of expand on the idea that each individual is different, and it's not just personality, it's not just cultural background, it's not just this, it's so many layers, that each human being is very complex. And so it's actually about understanding the individual and creating that space to say, this works for me and this doesn't work for me, is a
Mm,
really useful thing to do. And if you ignore that, then you're just running meetings and having conversations without that awareness, which is what I mentioned earlier. Then you're just running it in a way that works for certain people and not for other people. So
mm,
I think that dialogue about what works, what doesn't work is very helpful. And on the other hand, though, each individual also be by part of, because they're part of the team, it is their responsibility to adapt when they need to.
yeah.
So I sometimes find, particularly with multicultural teams, Often, this is also a stereotype, by the way, too, that the Asian cultures tend to be quieter. And part of it is stereotype. We assume that they're quieter because they're Asian, which is also unhelpful. But the other side of it is the people who have that cultural background might use that as an excuse to say, because I'm Japanese or because I'm this or because I'm introvert, you use your personality as an excuse. That's not helpful either. So there must be some kind of negotiation so that you get to a place so that it works for everybody, but also everybody puts in some effort.
Yeah. I think it's so important for teams to have the conversations about how we're operating, to be able to give each other feedback about
Yes.
what's working and what's not, because I do observe that some people don't realize that whether it's their quietness or whatever it might be, or their dominance, the impact it's having and the assumptions that people are making because of that. And
Yes.
sometimes it's that just through a conversation, they can be like, oh, okay, I didn't realize that's what you're
Yeah.
experiencing.
Yeah, exactly.
And it kind of brings it into the fore as well.
Yeah, yeah, it's back to
Yeah.
that awareness, isn't it? Like they may not intend to have that impact at all, but it's just that their lack of awareness has led to doing whatever they do, which doesn't work for the rest of the group. So,
Yeah. And I guess that with diverse teams, there is a mix of communication styles. So, what are some of the risks and benefits of having diverse teams?
yeah, so the risk is that it can fall apart,
Yeah.
right? Because if especially with the lack of awareness and lack of conversation, we're just automatically doing what we do, communicate the way that we think is right. And
Mm.
often, and I can count myself in it too sometimes, that you think the way that you do things or you communicate is the right way and everybody else is wrong.
Yeah. Well,
And
I'm
so,
right and the rest of the world's wrong. Yeah, I think
yeah,
that's
yeah,
the
yeah.
self-serving bias we hold, that we always think we're right. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I might go, well, nobody's listening and they should be listening more, but maybe people should be speaking up more or I should be speaking up more. So that self reflection is really important, but then
Mm.
also the awareness of how is the team communicating and then having the conversation. Otherwise, the risk is that the team can fall apart because you get frustrated with each other. You assume that they're doing it on purpose sometimes. The fundamental attribution error. Have you heard of that? Yeah. So we assume like people are doing it on purpose or due to bad intent. And maybe people are being secretive and they're being really quiet for that reason. And so then you start to get suspicious and you lose trust. And teams can really break apart as a result. And then all this talk about we need more diverse teams to be innovative and all of these things fall apart because you're not working through the differences. And sometimes I think the inclusion part of diversity and inclusion is the harder part, but that doesn't get done enough. Where, as a team, if you really want to harness the diversity in the team, then the hard work of inclusion, that is, listening to the voices that perhaps you don't like, or
Mm.
listening and working through disagreements and having that productive discussion, productive disagreement is going to be the skill that's going to be absolutely needed to make diverse teams work. And it's not necessarily just multicultural teams, etc., because in any team, there's some level of diversity.
Yeah, definitely. I know Deakin University's recently done a study around diversity within teams, and it actually found that when we only focus on our differences, it actually can drive teams further apart. And so we actually do need to look at our similarities too, to talk about understanding and valuing our similarities and
Yeah,
differences, because we can
yeah,
often just focus on the difference because it feels more stark, and we actually forget all the things that we have in common, how we do
yeah,
belong and fit together, or the
absolutely.
shared purpose teams have too.
Yeah, and sometimes some of the differences that we focus on are not always that useful or relevant in the context of, say, running a team or delivering an outcome as a team. It might be other things that are more important. And then there's the shared vision and shared goal that you have as a team that should bring people together.
Yeah, and
Mm,
that's when you get that true alignment with the team, which is,
yeah.
I guess what we're aiming for. And so I guess you talked about inclusion. Like, what does inclusive decision making look like in a thriving team?
Mm. Yeah, I had to think about that question a bit because I think there's a real desire for people to be part of decision making, and I think that's great for really important decisions. And some of the quietly powerful leaders talked about that actually, about how to involve people in thinking through decisions and being genuinely open, because it can really backfire if you say you want inclusive decision making and you're going with an already made up decision and you're just asking for feedback. That's sometimes really even more demoralizing. So I'd caution against that. So genuinely be curious about what other people think, which means you might have to let go of your thinking as well, your own initial idea about where things should go. So for important decisions, I think it's valuable to do that, because then you build ownership. Then you have teams who want to actually deliver on that decision rather than going, oh, well, the boss made that decision, they can deal with whatever they want, which can lead to disowning it and just doing what you're told, basically. There's a real power in important decisions being made together. Having said that, I think it's unrealistic. I'm being practical. It's unrealistic to be like that all the time. You just won't make any decisions otherwise. So,
Yeah, very time consuming.
yeah, time consuming, and you just won't make enough decisions that need to be made. So, there are times, I think, where the leader or somebody with the right expertise, maybe they have to make the decision. But I think, in terms of being inclusive around that, it's just about being transparent about your decision making process. If you say, for this particular item, because Claire's got the best knowledge about this, I'm going to leave her to make the decision, for example, would be much better than saying, well, let's all talk about it. And then you already have the decision anyway.
Because I think it's a real challenge in organisations that we can sometimes over collaborate
Yes,
or trying to always seek consensus.
yes,
And I think there's a bit of a balancing act there.
yes,
But then within a team, we want people to have that healthy debate so
yes.
that they can share what they need to share and everyone's
Mm,
perspectives have been heard. And we actually want them to disagree so they can align to the decision that's made. And I guess it's when teams might start taking things personally and it becomes a
yeah,
relationship conflict rather than
yeah,
task conflict, but
yeah,
that's often when things can sour a little bit. People feel like they're driving their own agendas too.
yeah.
You talked a little bit about how teams need to have those tougher conversations. In your experience, like what's a good way for a leader within a team to surface some of the challenges or frustrations or frictions within a team?
That's a whole podcast in itself, isn't
Yeah.
it?
Just in the second last question I'm going to ask you.
Yeah.
No, no.
Oh dear. Well, I think if you haven't got an environment or a climate in the team to be able to raise some difficult issues, that's the work that needs to be done first. So to create that climate. And the leader can do a lot in terms of creating the climate. For example, being much more vulnerable to say, I actually don't have the solution to this, or I don't have all the information to make a decision, or I have this idea, but I'm not quite sure, I need your input. So I think the leader can certainly set the scene in that way. I still remember one general manager that I worked with who really wanted the team to come with ideas, because he had this big sort of program of work and he wasn't sure whether he had all the answers to it. And he said to me at the time, it was like a team offsite, and he said to me, Megumi, I really want this team to come with their own ideas. They're a very talented team, and it just seems like they're saying things that they think I want to hear. That's what he said to me. And then they'd sort of close down and they won't say much. And I was observing this team all this time, and I did notice that they were looking at the leader every time they said something as if to check whether it's the right thing to say. So I noticed that. I also noticed that they would defer to the leader when it was like a tough question or a tough topic, to the leader saying, what do you think? My hunch was that they were so like over respectful of the leader's authority as well as expertise. And he was very well known to be a very high intellect, very capable leader. So he was very well respected, but that became over respect, such that people felt really they didn't want to disrespect him, nor do they think they knew more than him.
Yeah.
So my intervention at that point during the break was, I said to the leader, oh, you know what? I think this is what's happening. And I explained what I noticed. And I said, why don't you try just saying to them, I actually don't know all the answers to this particular problem, and I really need your help.
Yeah.
And to his credit, he did it.
Yeah.
And the floodgates opened. It was like the team just went, whoa, okay, this is why I do, this is why I do. And they started debating each other, and it was just incredible to watch.
That's excellent. Because I noticed similar dynamics like that. I
Mm,
think the research suggests that we look to the authority figure for direction, protection, and order
mm,
very regularly all the time. And it's partly for validation, it's
mm,
partly for security,
mm.
safety, all those things. And what's interesting is almost sometimes we need to give permission, or we need to give permission for people to come with solutions. Showing that vulnerability that you don't have the answer can really shift the dynamic within the team.
Yeah. Well, I had a quietly powerful leader actually talk about this and I spoke to the team members as well. It was from
Mm.
an executive team. So the leader said, "Oh, I really like to test my ideas and strategies and things." And he was a very intelligent guy too. But he just said, sometimes I'm not sure, so I just want to test it with the team. And so when I spoke to the team member, they said it was the best executive team he's ever worked in because the leader would bring his ideas and he would say, "Just tear it apart because I'm really not sure." And so he gave permission for the team to absolutely go to shreds with it and have that really, really robust debate about it. And that made it really energetic and people were really into it. And so he said it was the best executive team he's ever worked for. So I think there's something really powerful about what leaders can do to create that climate.
Yeah, create the environment where people can challenge each other, but also give each other feedback and learn to be open to feedback, because we want feedback to go every which way within a team. And what are some of the benefits of different communication styles within a team?
So when you have diverse communication styles, I think it brings out different ideas as well. Because if you think about communication, where it comes from is from our thinking. So when you think differently, you also communicate differently. And if you're tapping into different communication styles, it probably means, and this is definitely true of different cultures, when you think about how differently they communicate. Some cultures communicate very contextually, so broadly, and some communication styles are much more focused and directional. It means that they're thinking very differently, which means that different perspective is going to add to problem solving. It's going to add to making sure you don't have any blind spots when you're making decisions. It's going to help with risk management because people are going to see the risks that other people may not see. I think organizationally, if you can really tap into that through what we've been talking about around making sure you're aware of the different styles and learning the skills to work across and have really meaningful and useful dialogue across differences and finding commonalities, like you said as well. I think that's really going to be helpful. But I think the other human benefit to me of being able to work well across different communication styles is that when people feel like they're included in conversations and they're listened to, it means that they feel that their voice matters.
Mm.
And that's a
Absolutely.
huge contributor to engagement, to people wanting to bring their best, for people to add discretionary effort because they care.
Mm.
Because if they feel like they matter and that they're cared for, then of course they're going to bring their best.
Mm.
Have you heard of Zach Mercurio? He speaks about mattering.
Oh, I think I literally listened to his podcast yesterday.
Oh, okay, yeah, I've seen him speak and I've also seen his book, and he talks very much about mattering.
Yeah, I was
And
listening to it in the car home from the airport.
oh, wow. Yeah, 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 yeah. So I think it's so true.
Yeah,
When you don't feel that you matter, you stop contributing.
yeah, definitely. I think we want to be seen, heard, valued, but that feel like, and the result of that is feeling like we matter. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. So, Megumi, if you could leave our listeners with one message about thriving teams, what would that be?
So it's a question actually. So the
Yeah.
question I would leave everybody is everybody on the team contributing their absolute best?
Mm.
And if not, why not? And the why could be to do with the individual themselves. There might be some work that they need to do. That's often where people go. It's like people get told, oh, you need to speak up more, you need to be more assertive, etc. I'm thinking of the quieter types.
Yeah.
But actually, what if it's not about the individual? What if it's about the team? That they're too noisy, they don't create any space? Or what about if it's about the leader?
Yeah.
Maybe you're too dominant, or maybe you're not listening well enough and therefore they've given up. And what about the system itself, whether it's the organization as a whole, the culture of the organization, or maybe it's the policies and processes that are getting in the way? It could be lots of different things. So really thinking at multiple levels rather than saying, oh, this person needs fixing.
Yeah. I love the individual, the kind of shared, and then the systemic view of that question. So if a leader was to ask that question of their team, like how would you suggest that they do that in a way that they get responses from their team? I guess there's probably a level of psychological safety required,
Yeah,
but
I was going to say it depends on the relationship that they already have.
yeah,
And I bet the ones that have high psychological safety and strong relationship already will already be asking that question.
yeah,
They'll probably be
exactly.
asking it in each one-on-one. They'll probably be asking, how do you feel you're contributing? How do you feel you're performing? What's getting in the way? What can I do to help? That conversation will be happening regularly, I imagine.
That constant kind of coaching and feedback loop.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Beautiful.
Mm.
Well, Megumi, I feel very, very lucky to have seen you 2 days in a row.
Yay!
So thank you so much for your
Thank
time on the
you.
Thriving Leaders podcast.
Yeah, thank you for some thought-provoking questions as well. It got me thinking.
Awesome. Thanks.
Thank you.
What an inspiring conversation with Megumi Miki. Some of my key takeaways is that quiet doesn't necessarily just mean someone's introverted. There could be other reasons why someone's not speaking up, whether they don't feel psychologically safe, maybe to do with their emotionality or their level of stress, or there could be cultural reasons too. So not just assuming that when someone's not speaking up means that they're introverted. Another takeaway is that quiet doesn't equal weak. It can be really profound leadership strength. Some of the best leaders don't need to be in the spotlight or limelight all the time, but they create space for others to shine. We need to challenge our assumption that silence doesn't always equal agreement, nor does it mean that someone lacks confidence. Often, the quietest voices bring the most powerful insights. Inclusion isn't just about diversity in the room, it's actually about ensuring that every voice is heard, especially in teams where there's louder voices that might dominate. And my final reflection is that thriving teams are built when leaders model vulnerability, they facilitate space for different perspectives, and they focus on creating the conditions where everyone can contribute at their best. So, my question for you is the same one that Megumi posed. Is everyone on your team contributing their absolute best? And if not, why not? Thanks for joining us at the Thriving Leaders podcast. If you'd like to find out more about our leadership programs, including our Thriving Leaders program, Thriving Women in Leadership and Thriving Teams, as well as executive and team coaching, keynote speaking or facilitation, head to our website, www.thrivingculture.com.au. This is also where you can sign up for our newsletter, where I share useful leadership and team development insights and tools, as well as our podcast. You can also grab your copy of my book, Thriving Leaders, Learn the Skills to Lead Confidently. It's also available at all good online retailers on Audible, Spotify and Kindle. If you like this episode, I'd be so grateful if you left a 5-star review, as it helps us reach more people and therefore helps more leaders thrive.